Hello, hola, oi, ni hao, namaste. All right, good afternoon or good day to you wherever you're listening to me from. So this video you're about to watch now is basically about AI and storytelling. Now, most people are scared that AI will take over whatever. Now, this is of course a real truth and something that is definitely coming because not to deny it is actually happening. So, but then this video provides much more ideas and much more thoughts because some people like we have to guess. I don't have the guess. Fiverr has to guess that they provided that will probably be breaking this down into like pieces and all that, so you can actually understand how you can enhance or utilize AI as a freelancer in freelancing journey. So I hope this help in some way, and then if it does, please remember to like, share, subscribe. So continue and then happy learning. See you.
Today's conversation is hosted by Fiverr, an online marketplace empowering freelancers and businesses to connect, collaborate, and create. Fiverr's mission is to change the way the world works together and help individuals and small businesses find success. AI services are one of the fastest growing communities on Fiverr, and we're excited about what types of opportunities that presents for our freelancers and clients. We hope you enjoyed today's conversation, and if you want to check out any of Fiverr's AI services, we'll share that in the link in the chat as well. As for me, my name is Mindie Kaplan. I hail from a tech and digital background with Microsoft, Ford, and Nissan, and am the founder of a VR AR company called Rated VR that was acquired by MediaMint, where I'm currently the VP of Innovation. And I also host a series of AI panels and events in partnership with Soho House, and an AI and emerging tech investor as well. More importantly, I wanted to introduce Taryn Southern. I hope you guys are sitting down. It is a novel of amazingness. Taryn is an award-winning artist and filmmaker known for her work at the intersection of emerging tech and human potential. Her work includes co-directing and producing an award-winning documentary on the future of the brain, which was an official selection in the 2019 Tribeca Film Festival, which was composed of the world's first AI album, producing an award-winning Google VR series, and releasing the first Ethereum-based song token. A 3-time Streamy Awards nominee, Taryn's work has been featured in Vanity Fair, Billboard, Fast Company, Wired, Forbes, Psychology Today, Harvard Business Review, and more. A pioneering YouTuber, Taryn uploaded her first viral video to YouTube back in 2007. 10 years and 750 million views later, Taryn had written, produced, or starred in more than 1,500 pieces of digital content. Got all that? During that time, she has created series for networks like Condé Nast, The Today Show, MTV, Snap, Maker Studios, and written for Business Insider and TechCrunch. She's also served as a host for the Discovery Channel's #1 late night show and signed a development deal with National Geographic Network. Lastly, since that time, Taryn has designed dozens of media initiatives to help science and technology companies spark consumer conversation, inspire investment interest, and shift public perception. From biotech to blockchain, she's advised or invested in companies like Vessel, HTV Vive, Extend Fertility, Forever Labs, Tubular, Aura, and Marriott, and sits on the board of the National Academy of Medicine Longevity Challenge. A passionate advocate of women in tech, she's currently developing several projects in the science and emerging tech spaces. Okay, wow. Taryn, amazing. I wanted to jump into a few questions about all of that. First of all, I'm not sure where you find the time, but as an artist, you've definitely explored many creative genres. What was the first creative project you remember starting, and who were some of the artists that inspired you growing up?
Wow. Well, I have to say, growing up, I did not have the most eclectic taste.
Taryn, I think you're on mute. Just to build the suspense.
It's great. Love suspense. It looks like I'm still backstage. Is there a way to pull me into the main stage? I'm live?
Yes.
Looks like I'm live. So you can hear me.
Yes. All set.
Okay, great. So now I'm audible. So I was saying, growing up, I did not have the most eclectic taste in artists. I listened to Britney Spears and Spice Girls. I think I was inspired by women who were bold and provocative and had something to say. So I'd say my tastes have shifted somewhat, but I'm still very much interested in and fascinated by artists who push the boundaries of possibility, who are conveying interesting ideas in their work. As for my very first project, also maybe not the most complex creative project, but I remember at 12 years old putting together a Beanie Baby, designing a Beanie Babies fan website for
Ooh,
my
very innovative.
coveted, very innovative. It was, dedicated to my Beanie Babies collection. I had to learn HTML in order to code sparkly rotating graphics for each of my babies. And like many creatives, I became disillusioned really quickly after receiving a cease and desist letter from Thai Beanie Babies, who at the time
wow.
did not take well to anyone infringing on their copyright. So I dashed my hopes of being a computer web designer at the ripe age of 13.
And as far as AI goes, how has AI influenced your creative process? I know you were very early to the space, particularly in storytelling. When did you begin incorporating it into your work?
It's interesting. AI has actually been around for a very long time and just deeply embedded in our technology. The first time I remember creating a song with a computer, I was probably 15. I downloaded some freeware software from the internet. It certainly was not good. It was this pretty awful sounding MIDI that I created. But I think, my natural inclination to use technology to tell stories was always there. And then in 2016, I was part of this Google Artist in Residence program and experimenting with a lot of different technologies that were still under the hood there at Google. And at the time was looking for a music generation tool that would allow me to make high quality stock music for my video and VR creations. And that's really how I stumbled upon AI. That was my first use case of it. And I was blown away by what I was able to create. And within 12 months, I created an entire pop album using a number of different AI music tools. And I would say, there are a lot of ways that AI has impacted my creative process, but we'll start with the biggest one, which is I always think of creative process as a combination of process and creativity. And depending on the types of tools you're using, that creative process might be 90% process, 10% creativity. And as a former YouTuber, I remember when I was making videos all of the time, I really felt mired in process, especially back in 2010, 2011, 2012. We didn't have the kinds of tools that we have now to scale our operations. And so, oh my gosh, the amount of time you would spend just transcoding a video, making sure your codecs and export settings were correct. And the editing process took so much longer, and there was a steep learning curve for a lot of these things. AI has changed all of that. So now if you want, you can create a creative process for yourself that is 10% process, 90% creativity. And that's really my whole thesis around AI, is that you get to adopt the tools that best service your skill sets, or in my case, lack thereof, the skill sets that I don't have. I also found that AI was able to step in and help, let's say, assuage fears that I had in certain areas, or limitations I had in certain areas.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was working on my album, I didn't come from a traditional music background, but I love writing songs. I love writing lyrics. I love writing vocal melodies. And in working with these tools, it was able to substitute the areas that I simply just do not have a language for, or a traditional music background for, so that I could create something substantive without any assistance from the outside world. And I think that is the ultimate democratizer of creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And since we're here on Fiverr, It's the perfect platform for speaking about the democratization of creativity. We didn't have a world 30 years ago where a kid in Nebraska with no resources, no connections, no money could create something that millions of people could see. And now we live in that space, and these AI tools are only going to help make that more robust.
Mm-hmm. And you're one of the first creators to make a digital clone of yourself, as we're talking about being one of the first and being so early. There seems to be a pattern here. Can you explain how this was created, how you use it, and then what, if any, would be some implications for the future of storytelling and marketing and advertising?
So I created the virtual clone of myself back in 2020. It was at the early onset of COVID. I had become familiar with a company called Hour One, which was one of the early companies in the virtual cloning, AI cloning space. We went into a green screen studio where I sat 20 feet from the director across from me, because again, this was early stages of COVID, and we ingested about 20 minutes of video material and audio material to create the first Taryn clone. And I was particularly excited about this experiment because, again, when I was a full-time content creator, full-time YouTuber back in 2015, 2016, I felt really disillusioned and exhausted, quite frankly, from the process. And we hear this a lot from content creators that, the churn is real. There's just, it's very, very hard to keep up with the demands of creating content. And if you're the person that's on camera, that can be quite exhausting to have to maintain that for many, many years at a time. And it was one of the reasons that I ended up leaving YouTube and spending my time on other creative endeavors. So I was curious, what happens when I can essentially clone myself and spend all of my time on the things that I love doing, which is writing and research and sort of directing of a video concept. And that was really the experiment. I have to say, I haven't used the avatar much. I still find that we're just a hair away from creating them to the point where there's not that uncanny valley feeling. And
Early.
we're a little early, but it will get there. And I think it's important to also acknowledge the concerns and the fears that come along with this type of technology application. But and those are very real. But if we're looking at the opportunities that exist for marketers, for advertisers, for creators, I think it's quite clear. I mean, you just are able to create much more, spend time on the actual video ideation, and perhaps not exhaust yourself in the process.
Yeah.
And in addition, be able to develop sort of fine-tune control over the messaging in your videos. I can't tell you how many times I'm sure you felt this, Mindie, where you go and you record something, you spend all this time in hair and makeup, and then you get into the editing bay and you're like, oh my gosh, I said that wrong, or I have like something in my teeth, silly things like that just all of a sudden destroy the whole shoot. And now, with these new technologies, that's a thing of the past.
Yeah, those clones won't have the same issues. I want to kind of go a little rogue just on that question because I want to make sure we cover it. I just know, even personally, and I imagine a lot of people would, how do you keep up with everything as far as like knowing about digital clones, and then obviously being like a pioneer with AI so long ago? Like, how do you stay informed and how do you stay ahead of all the upcoming technology?
I think part of this is some just insatiable curiosity that I've always had as a kid with technology. I genuinely love it. So I subscribe to all the news feeds about what's coming out the door. I mean, I remember in 2016, my first exposure to AI music tools came from reading an article in the New York Times. And I was so curious that I actually reached out to all the founders of the company saying, how do I get my hands on your tool? Because they weren't publicly available then. There was no public interface. You had to actually, either learn to code or get the special access. And so a lot of that just comes from an innate curiosity and wanting to know how these tools could empower my next creative endeavor.
Yeah.
But, I will say, where we are at in history is unprecedented. And when OpenAI opened up their API to every tool maker on the planet, all of a sudden you saw hundreds of new tools flooding the market. Image tools, video tools, audio tools. It's impossible to keep up, and they all have their opportunities. They all have their advantages, their limitations. And so I cannot keep up nowadays. Like, I have a master AI tool spreadsheet that I've been keeping now for almost a year, and I update it regularly with notes with the pros and cons of all of these tools. And I'd say, like, after 6-8 weeks of experimenting with the tool, it goes through another iteration and changes. And so I'm constantly going and updating it. We are at the very beginning. And so I want to say to people, don't feel like you're behind. We're all in this wild, wild west together. And we haven't even yet seen the quote unquote winners of the content creation space. So there's a lot of maturation that needs to happen. And for now, I just recommend people explore. And I also, I have a group on my Instagram, Experiments in AI. It's a little broadcast channel. That's where I post experiments, updates, some of these master tool notes. So if people are interested in sort of how I'm curating and thinking about that, that might be a place and a free resource that you can go to.
Yeah, that would be great. We'll add that in the chat as well. You've also produced many amazing creative projects across various mediums. Can you describe one of them in detail and explain how AI played a significant role in the shaping of the narrative or creative direction?
Yes, I'm gonna start with actually one that's a bit obscure. It's a personal project. So a couple of years ago, I scanned all of my grandparents' photographs from the 1930s and 40s. This was in COVID, 2020. And I used AI to digitize and colorize and then upscale the photos. So you could see my grandfather flying his first airplane, and it was in full color.
Wow.
And this project, which started out as just sort of an opportunity to digitize my family history, has taken on a whole life of its own. So as the tools matured, and you saw tools where you could suddenly animate photographs, bring them to life, if you will, the ability to vocal clone so that you can essentially encapsulate someone's voice, personality. So now I've sort of created what I call a living AI family tree. So think about it like a traditional visual family tree, but now you can interact and chat with different members of my family. And this is kind of a way to preserve legacy. It's an AI powered time capsule of sorts.
Wow.
And it's an amalgamation of different tools that allow you to upload assets and writing and various aspects of their life to create this almost three-dimensional history. And I don't know exactly how this project will continue to evolve, but I'm just so excited by it. And it feels like one very random application of these AI tools in a creative fashion. So that's one project. I'm working on another project right now, which has just been a lot of fun. It's a psychedelic animated musical comedy called Shrooms, which dives into the very high stakes battle between and it dives into this battle between politics and big pharma and public opinion in this fight to legalize psychedelics. And I really wanted to do this project because I saw with these AI image and video generation tools that nothing is impossible anymore. I can create absolutely anything on a shoestring budget. So why not create something that would have been virtually impossible to do or very challenging to do, which is a trippy musical comedy.
Yeah. It's amazing. When will that be out?
That's a good question. Of course, I started using Midjourney and Runway as the tools to bring that to life, and then OpenAI released Sora, and I thought, oh my gosh, should I wait? Should this? Maybe I'll put a little pause on this, see how I can integrate these tools. So it's been a huge learning experience for me.
Love that. And so you and I know each other back in the VR days when I remember the hype of VR was very high, and similar to AI. And now AI obviously has many more applications. And we've been hearing a lot about the generative AI specifically. Could be a potential threat to creatives, because I know we're talking about all the opportunity and we all feel strongly about that. But curious about the other side of that. What are some misconceptions that people might have about the relationship between AI and creativity, in your opinion, and how could we address them best?
Sure. I think there are a lot of misconceptions, but I also think that the misconceptions are important entry points to substantive conversation. There's the biggest concern right now that I see is around sort of the legality of AI, and I think a lot of that is going to work itself out through more technology, right? The building of revenue streams and platforms that can actually determine the uh, the original works that were used to train models and offer micropayments to artists on a large scale. A lot of those kinds of tools will really sort of change the public sentiment here, just as it did with YouTube. I remember back in 2009, 2010, it was virtually impossible to release a cover song and monetize that cover song without it being taken down by a label. And then new technology startups came about that made that process of licensing and issuing royalties to both cover artists and the underlying IP holder. And everything shifted. Now cover songs are a huge part of YouTube and have been for some time. So I think that will happen with AI. But on the more philosophical side of things, there are a few misconceptions I hear a lot. One is that AI will replace human creativity. I have a strong belief that that's just not the case. We've seen these fears play out in history for a very long time. I mean, the advent of the first musical machine was seen as something to fear by live musicians, and then it led to the advent of recorded music. And I think AI artists and creators get to explore a lot of new possibilities and push the boundaries of their imagination with these tools. And art really is in the eye of the beholder. Does it make you feel something? Do you ascribe value to it? This collaboration between AI and artists, I think, will continue in a big way. Another sort of misconception that I often hear is that AI generated content is not original. And this is a very interesting conversation to have, but it's an important one. The way that human beings come up with creative ideas is this sort of interesting mix of learning, copying, mimicking, synthesizing information. We borrow ideas, we're exposed to new ideas, and then oftentimes we don't realize that we're pulling from many different exposures when we come up with something new. And AI works in much the same way. So I think that there's a lot of education that needs to happen just around what's actually happening behind the wheel, or behind, underneath the hood rather, of AI, and how we can utilize these tools as conduits to our own infinite imaginations.
I think that's a great word too, a conduit, or almost like augmenting the creative process. Doesn't sound as scary as replacing. As far as your involvement, bigger picture, in advising and investing in companies like Vessel and Aura, it definitely shows your expertise in understanding emerging tech at the right time. How do you foresee AI shaping the future landscape of storytelling platforms and content tools?
I think it changes so much. For one, the cost of creation is being dramatically reduced every single day, right? And I think it's getting to a point where you're looking at the cost becoming close to zero for an individual talent to conceptualize, write, produce, direct a project of their own imagination. So what that means is essentially every individual, much like the early content creators on YouTube, suddenly were these multidisciplinary artists taking on many different traditional Hollywood roles, from writer and director to actor and makeup artist and costume designer. I mean, they were sort of doing all of it and synthesizing all of it. AI will simply scale that process. And so I think we will see individual artists become mini production studios, and really talented storytellers could become the next great directors of our time. So I see that as a very exciting proposition. I think curation is going to be really important in this new world, because when you reduce the cost of production to almost zero, you end up with a lot of noise. And just because something looks well made doesn't mean that there's a great story behind it. So I do think this, this process of developing storytelling expertise will become hyper important. We look at companies like Pixar, who sort of have nailed a formula for storytelling. There's a reason why their movies are so good. They're constantly prototyping. They have a process. And I think this will become this sort of thinking about storytelling, developing a taxonomy around your process will be really, really important as we move forward, in order to set yourself apart from all the other content that looks great, but maybe doesn't have an amazing story behind it. I think another sort of trend that we'll see happen, at least in the marketing and advertising world, is hyper targeting. Obviously, people have a lot of different thoughts on this. So barring ethics conversations, being provided an advertisement that is exactly tailored and targeted to your needs, your sort of what you're searching for online, and using premium video tools to do that, that will be huge. I finally believe that biometrics will be an interesting sort of piece of this new storytelling pie. So many of us wear, whether it's an Aura ring, which I am an investor in, or other sort of biometrics that are being taken from our iPhone around sleep, around mood. All of these things will start to integrate with these storytelling vehicles. So stories will be delivered that will actually help us, our mental health, our motivation, our drive. All of these things will become components of storytelling as well.
And could you share any specific AI-driven projects you're currently working on in addition to that, or plotting and planning at the moment, and how they push the boundaries of the storytelling innovation you've already pioneered too?
Sure. So, I already mentioned shrooms, so we've talked about that, but I've been working on a couple of projects. I suppose they count as creative projects. One is a breast cancer 101 GPT, and it's a GPT that incorporates all the insights that I picked up and research that I curated through my treatment for breast cancer back in 2019. And I'm really hoping that this could serve as a helpful conversational tool for other young women who are diagnosed. There's just a lot of noise on the internet, and it's hard to know, what kind of information to trust. And so to be able to provide young patients with not just new tools and insights, but also the right questions to ask their doctors and their providers, I think is something that I would have personally wanted to have back when I was going through that. So that's, that's a project. I'm also working on a storytelling tool that helps people architect their best ideas. I've learned through working with AI that telling great stories ultimately comes down to knowing how to answer, basically knowing what the best questions are to ask. And so I find that if I can prompt people with a series of about 20, 30 questions around their goals and objectives for telling a certain story, I can get really, really good storytelling frameworks from them. So I've been creating a tool that hopefully makes this easier for aspiring storytellers to use and gets them thinking about all of the unique ways that they could tell a story, right? Because when we think about stories, we often just think video or social media, but there's a million and one ways to tell a story. And that's, video and sort of social media are just a few avenues. So I'm excited to get people thinking about these other ways.
Yeah, definitely. we're gonna jump into a few questions. So the first audience question is from Thomas. Hey Taryn, I attended your virtual concert in Altspace VR a few years ago. How has your history as an artist shaped your thoughts on AI as a concept many creators fear?
Wow, I can't believe someone who's here was in my alt space VR virtual concert. So that was my first time ever singing in VR. And it was so interesting because um I have a unique history as a singer. When I was 17 years old, I did American Idol, and I begged my parents to drive me from, Kansas to Los Angeles so that I could audition for this show. And I slept outside at the Pasadena Rose Bowl. And once I got up to actually sing, I realized I've never sang except uh, on a high school theater stage.
Yeah, it's a big
And all of
difference.
a sudden was just overtaken by the most debilitating stage fright. Could not think. It was
Understandable.
like, oh my gosh, it was terrifying. And I'm, with thousands of other people in the Rose Bowl. I ended up making it through that first round and then making it through another round and making it through another round. But every round along the way, my stage fright got worse and worse and worse. And my awareness of my own limitations also became more heightened. So I would look around me and see, oh, there's 10 people who have incredible dance skills, and then 30 of them can play the guitar and piano. I can't play an instrument. So as I went along, my stage fright got worse. And of course, this story sort of ends in a flourish with me in the semifinals of American Idol, get on national television live, forgetting all of my lyrics to my song.
Oh.
And I said, I'm never going to sing again. And lo and behold, here I am, 15 years later, I think it was, in virtual reality, holding a virtual concert. And I had this insight that I felt so much more empowered.
Mhm.
And all of those kind of stage fright fears melted away. It was like not having the eyes on me in a certain way really, really impacted me. So I would just say, for one, AI and technology like VR open up these new opportunities for people, whether it's reducing your stage fright or allowing you to create certain things that you wouldn't be able to because of skill sets that you don't have. I think it's really, really exciting. So um, it's shaped my thoughts on AI in that way. I think that the possibilities are sort of endless for artists with these new techs.
Yeah, without all the distractions too. Um,
That's right.
our next question is from David. All right, this one's a little bit of a novel, so let me know if I lose you. Using AI to help brainstorm ideas is fun. Finding software to help you organize your outline, characters, and plot is also fun and helpful. Is there any real software out there that you use to help brainstorm and organize your projects?
So I still ChatGPT is the number one software that I'm using for brainstorming, for idea generation.
Mhm.
But I've also been using Gemini quite a lot more recently. In terms of organizing outline, characters, plot, there's a number of storyboarding tools like LTX and Lore Machine and Storyboarder.ai, which I've only lightly experimented with. So I'm excited to get more into those tools, but at the moment, I still perform a lot of the work of curating the ideas, but I just absolutely love GPT as a brainstorm tool.
And what's the difference in how you're using GPT versus Gemini?
Gemini, I've typically been using to upload very large quantities of existing content that I've created
Mhm.
and having it analyze that content. I found it to be, in my view, superior to the others. Um, when I'm using GPT, I typically will give GPT a framework. Like I'll often say, uh, for instance, the story taxonomy that I created, there's a series of 20 story vehicles that I use to have GPT analyze a particular idea and then spit out ideas for where I could go in terms of content generation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been really, really helpful for me.
Okay.
But Gemini, as a tool to analyze large bodies of existing work, I found it to be fantastic.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah, and I'll say poke holes in my story. What could I improve upon? I find a lot of people, ask GPT to just write something for them, but
Mhm.
where I get really excited is in asking GPT, hey, you're now an award-winning director or an award-winning editor for the New Yorker. Tell
Mhm.
me where I have biases, where I have plot holes, where problems exist, how I can strengthen this story, strengthen this writing. And
Mhm.
that's where you really learn. It's so cool.
So you're almost challenging it, not just using it as a tool. So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I think so. Our next two questions actually come from the lens of AI ethics, and kind of back to that. This one from Nick is: what happens to artists and writers when AI gets so advanced that the end consumer just presses a button on an app and don't need us anymore?
It's a really great question. And unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball, but I do believe that we as humans inherently place value on human creativity. And, I'll give a rudimentary answer. Runners, like
Mhm.
people still train for years and years and years to become amazing runners. They do marathons. We have plenty of machines that can move faster,
Mhm.
that can send us from point A to point B much
Mhm.
faster, but we still value this the human effort and the human performance. And I think the same absolutely goes for creativity. Does that mean that we're not going to have these tools where at the click of a button you can generate a story? No, I think we will have those tools and they will be useful for certain people and for certain constructs, but I don't think that they will completely replace the artist and writer, or at least I hope not. I mean,
Mhm.
I can't tell how much of this is just tech optimism on my part,
Yeah.
but there were a lot of fears about YouTube replacing television or
Mhm.
long form media. That has not happened. I think we tend to just develop more branches
Yeah.
of creativity
Yeah.
through
Definitely.
these new tools.
Mm-hmm. And even to build on that, I used GPT recently to come up with this photo shoot idea. Now, I had this idea years ago, and I explained it to a team, and we did the photo shoot, and it was nothing like I had envisioned. And I used GPT for 20 minutes and just said, use this likeness, kept iterating a bit, and had like a perfect example to show to the team. And it was exact, but I needed that team to execute it and to strategize together. So that piece wasn't being replaced, but the legwork of getting to that point um, to be strategic was really helpful. So that was just one way I've used it that was extra reassuring that no one's being replaced. It's just another, tool to enhance. Um, Next question is from Martin. What are your thoughts about user authenticity when people can use Gen AI with malicious intent?
Interesting. I'm trying to think about what Martin means by user authenticity. So, what are your thoughts on that, Mindy? Because you can use generative AI with malicious intent in a variety of different ways. Whether
Yeah.
that's, I suppose is maybe Martin is talking about scam artists and being able to generate content that's not real.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too. So maybe we'll freestyle on that.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be the hot topic of this year, especially with an election coming up.
Mm-hmm.
We can't tell the difference now between real and generative AI content. That is
Mm-hmm.
very, very frightening. This is an incredibly real problem. And, Facebook just rolled out a new tool where apparently the video content that's being shared on their site that is AI generated will be watermarked with that.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't yet know how that tool works, if it works, and also what does AI generated even mean? A lot of people are now using filters on their videos, which could be
Right.
considered an AI generative tool. Is it being generated from scratch, pixel by pixel, or is it like a slight morphing editing VFX tool? So these are big problems that have to be solved, and the technology companies, I think all eyes are on them right now to develop tools that will keep viewers informed. But I am really scared in that respect about what could happen to democracy, what can just happen to sort of this idea of truth. I mean, we already have a problem deciding on what is true or isn't true, and this is only going to make that more challenging. What are your thoughts, Mindie?
Yeah, I mean, I think also on the side of deep fakes, I think that's something else that we're starting to see creep up, and how to actually differentiate what that's going to look like, if it is a watermark or if it is something that is clear. But I think it is a bit overwhelming to think about the possibilities. We have another question too that is kind of on this note, so I'm going to add this in too. Mario actually had a question about public perception of designers and illustrators selling AI services, which could also fall into some of those categories around inauthenticity too.
Sure. Well, this is tricky because I'm an AI. I call myself an AI artist to some extent. So I suppose I'm marketing myself in such a way. And of course, the public perception is mixed, right? I get comments all the time on my Instagram saying this isn't real art, or go back to Kansas. Whatever.
What? I don't like that one.
And I get it. Like, we're at this really interesting juncture, and people are still figuring out how they feel about these tools. And I personally obviously don't have a problem with designers and illustrators using AI to empower their work. And I find in most of the conversations I have with designers and illustrators, they're using AI to rapidly prototype ideas, to storyboard. And that allows them to get to the brilliant idea faster. But most of them, I find, are not actually using AI in their sort of final creation of the product. It's more of a brainstorming tool, because when you're a really skilled designer or illustrator, your use of the existing tools, the fine-tuning tools, is probably more robust than you using the existing AI tools today. So, I think it depends on how these services are being marketed and sold, and the language around them. If you're just saying I'm a designer illustrator who's going to create something with one click of a button for you with AI, you're probably going to upset a lot of people.
Right.
But if you're talking about using it to enhance your existing process, your existing skill sets, I think people give you a lot more leeway.
Makes sense. And Marilyn was curious about if there's any AI courses you recommend for beginners.
Yes, actually, there is a filmmaking course. Of course, I'm not going to remember it while I'm live. There's a Curious Refuge filmmaking course. Fantastic. I don't know those guys personally, but I've actually taken their course. I did it last fall. I thought it was fantastic, and it will provide you sort of great entry point into all of the primary tools that you need to learn to create
like AI
stunning
101.
AI video.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Everything from Mid-Journey to ChatGPT, story development, ideation, storyboarding, animation, all of that. It's in there, and I highly recommend it.
Perfect. And Shri from where did Shri go? Okay. Shri would like to know, what are creative mediums that won't actually be affected by AI?
I'd say none of them.
None of the above.
None of them, unfortunately. I mean, every industry will be impacted by AI. So you could look at it as no one is safe here. Or we all have this opportunity to plug in these tools to our process. And I don't think that there's any creative field that won't be touched by AI. We have already seen in the span of a year, since it's only been a year and some months since ChatGPT was introduced to the world. That's wild. And the things that we've been able to build on top of that, it's just absolutely crazy. So I don't see any space in the creative field that won't be touched. I think the question really is, how can I use these tools to create something really innovative? And I do think one area that is obviously very nascent, but spatial computing, it's it's sort of the VR of the future.
Mhm.
And as those headsets get smaller, more nimble, more affordable, I do think we will sort of see a renaissance there. And there will be a heavy need for a lot of creators who can work in that space. And I think AI will be a huge component in
Mhm.
the making of those projects.
Definitely. Daphne wants to know if she can get her paws on that spreadsheet of yours. She says, if you don't mind sharing it, I'd love a few pointers because, like you, I'm experimenting with a bunch of different tools, and it would help a lot to facilitate that.
It is a point of popular demand, and I've never taken the time to actually make it visually appealing. And right now, it's one of those very messy spreadsheets with 10 tabs for every category of creativity. But because so many people ask for it, I am going to put it together in a more visually appealing format. So
Amazing.
be on the lookout for that. I'm going to send it to everyone who's in the Experiments for AI broadcast channel on my Instagram, which is just Taryn Southern Instagram. So if you're part of that channel, you will get a link to that at some point in the next couple of weeks because everyone's been asking.
Yeah,
And I
great. Myself
it
included.
is.
Shazia wants to know, how do you protect your intellectual property? How do you protect your IP in the changing world of AI?
That's such a great question. And I don't have a good answer for that. I don't know. I am not on the OpenAI team. I do not know how they are scraping their data. I just read an article this morning that the New York Times did an investigation, and it looks like OpenAI was scraping data from YouTube. This is alleged. I don't know if this
Mhm.
actually happened. But if that's
Mhm.
the case, then anything that you've produced and created and put on YouTube could be part of the training data that was used for Sora. And me as a content creator, most of my work, early work, was all put on YouTube. So, whether it's VR work, vlogs,
Mhm.
you name it. And I don't know how I feel about that. As I think philosophically I'm probably a little bit more in the open source camp of wanting creativity to be freely available and providing the tools. But I also believe that there should be a monetization mechanism for artists, as we talked about earlier, where if
Mhm.
your work is being used to train, that you should be compensated for that in some form. So that's basically a long answer to say there is no way right now to protect your intellectual property unless you choose to not share it with the world, which is
Right.
sort of
Straight off.
in
Yeah.
direct friction with creativity and
Mhm.
sort of the point of being a creative artist. So there is no way to protect it at this stage. And let's just hope that the right tools will come around to help artists better protect their IP or at least monetize their IP appropriately.
Right. And Farrell wants to know, how do you direct AI graphic tools to draw hands better?
To draw hands better, I'm assuming Farrell is referring to the fact that AI tools typically don't create hands very well in
Yeah.
photorealistic projects. Is that
Yes. Yes, I would take it as that too.
so? I will say the tools are getting better. The latest
Mhm.
updates of Midjourney, you're seeing far less problems with 6 and 7 fingered hands. Um, but at least in the earlier iterations, and I can't speak for all of the AI visual tools, I'd have to go back to my handy spreadsheet. But
Yeah.
I
Can't wait to see.
I typically, when I'm creating photorealistic humans or head, I'm using sort of middle shots or close-ups to avoid the hands. But I do believe that the latest iteration of Midjourney solves for that.
Okay. All right, we're going to do two more questions, guys. Martin wants to know, what's your dream AI tool that doesn't exist yet?
Ah,
And
I
let's
want
create.
the one. Yes, I want the one-stop shop. So a couple of weeks ago, I gave a demonstration on stage of the creation of a video trailer from
Mhm.
scratch, utilizing about 5 different tools. And I had to use the 5 different tools because to optimize for different pieces of that creation process, the only way to do it was to use those 5 different tools, which again takes a sort of knowledge of the tools and their limitations. And so I of course started with the sort of script generation research process with ChatGPT. I then created a series of prompts reflecting the script with ChatGPT as well. I placed those cinematic prompts into an image generator. Then I used an animation tool to bring those images to life into video form. Then I used an AI editing tool to take those individual video pieces and
I'm
stitch them
exhausted
together.
hearing all this.
And I did this all within the span of 10 minutes with a little bit of movie magic, of course, because I'd already generated all of the pieces. But it was to demonstrate, the creator's dilemma right now with AI is that we don't have one tool that allows for us to do all of these things in one space. And so you get that actually adds time and energy into the process. And I would love to see a tool that can bring it all together. So right now, I'll just tell you my favorite AI tools for writing and research. As I said, it's usually ChatGPT, although sometimes Gemini. For animation, it's Midjourney, and I'm sorry, for images, for generating images, it's Midjourney. For bringing those images to life, I use Runway as my animation tool. And to stitch it all together, I will either use Veed, VideoGen, HeyGen, or CapCut. And that kind of depends on what type of video I'm looking to create.
Yeah.
And knowing what each of those tools kind of gives me. So for instance, HeyGen, I think does an excellent job of creating video clones. So if I'm using a host or a narrator in the video, I will use HeyGen to do the editing. But all of that sort of takes a bit of working and experimenting with the tools to know which ones to select. Or using my handy AI Master Tools spreadsheet, which will soon be delivered to the world.
Can't wait for that. Well, I think our last question was actually pretty similar to the previous one. So we covered all of that. I'm going to take a second for an announcement just to remind everyone to take your post-event survey. It's available now for a chance to win $100 in Fiverr credits. And you can take it anytime during this next week. The winner will be notified by Fiverr via email. And sadly, Taryn, we're at the end of our conversation. And I really want to thank you so much for all of your amazing insights. And thank you also to everyone who came and asked very thoughtful questions today. We'll be sharing the recording on our YouTube channel, where you're welcome to continue the conversation in the chat. And I'll be back with all of you in April for our second session with another guest speaker. So look out for your invite to that as well. Thank you so much.
Great to see you, Mindie. Thank you.
You too.